Thank you for listening to We Have Ways of Making You Talk. Sign up to our Patreon to receive bonus content, live streams, and our weekly newsletter with money off books and museum visits as well, plus early access to all live show tickets. That's patreon.com/WeHaveWays.
Things change, but Deer Park Natural Spring Water is a constant you can count on, bringing you the essence of home for 150 years and counting. Sourced from carefully selected springs, Deer Park Natural Spring Water has naturally occurring electrolytes for a crisp, refreshing taste. Find Deer Park Natural Spring Water at your favorite local retailer today. After 150 years, there's only one thing left to say. Deer Park, that's still good water.
Sailors and airmen of the Allied Expeditionary Force, you are about to embark upon the great crusade toward which we have striven these many months. The eyes of the world are upon you.
On the eve of this great adventure, I send my best wishes to every soldier in the Allied keep.
The tide has turned. The free men of the world are marching together to victory. I have full confidence in your courage, devotion to duty, and skill in battle. We will accept nothing less than full victory. Good luck, and let us all beseech the blessing of Almighty God upon this great and noble undertaking.
Hanson Baldwin came in this evening, and he does not attempt to conceal his disappointment at the little progress we have made. Disregarding the Bocage country we fight in, and the terrain which hinders our movements, the swamps which canalize our advance, the lack of space in which to maneuver, and the necessity for build-up before we break out, he asks why we haven't gotten more quickly. Claims we are not making maximum use of mobile warfare, that we never really learn our lesson, and that we're still fighting in the fashion of World War I. He doesn't understand the General's intent when he talks like that. General dislikes slugging it out this way, but warned that such a period would come that he would have to slug it out for a while before he has a chance to make his breakthrough. And that, of course, was Captain Chet Hansen, or maybe he's Major by this point, senior aide to General Omar Bradley, who's commander of US First.
And subsequently his sort of ghostwriter.
Yeah, and his ghostwriter kept this absolutely brilliant unpublished diary, which is in the United States Army Heritage and Education Center at Carlisle Barracks in Pennsylvania, and it's completely brilliant. And this is written on the 13th of July, 1944.
Well, that's really important when this is written, because this is, you know, a bit more than... Oh, by the way, welcome to We Have Ways of Making You Talk, Second World War II podcast, We Have Ways of Making You Talk, with me, Murray and James Holland, and we're on episode 8, we think, yes, of our D-Day series.
Which we've loosely titled The Constraints of Wealth and the Freedom of Poverty.
Yeah, we've loosely titled it that. Yeah. But this is a month after D-Day. We've had the Great Storm, because where we left you was on the cliffhanger of the 19th of June, which, of course, 19th, 20th of June was the next window of opportunity. Yes, for landing.
Had they
postponed?
Oh my God!
Which then means when's the next? Because they've got the forecast on that and thought, oh well, we can't go.
Yep.
So you're then going in July. You know, every second counts in this.
Absolutely.
Because the weather, eventually the autumn's coming, the equinox is coming, the classical campaign season is ending, and your air power advantage only endures in hours of daylight. And all these things. The windows are closing.
What's fascinating about that piece is what's happened here is a kind of well-known, well-regarded journalist has come in and started telling them how to run the campaign. Yeah. You know, the arrogance of that, and armchair historians and journalists still proclaim in the same way and want to criticise generals for what they did in Normandy. And I remember reading this for the first time years ago and thinking, God, nothing nothing's changed at all. Hanson is absolutely right to take Hanson Baldwin to task on this, because he doesn't know what the hell he's talking about. He has no idea. And this is the point. He doesn't understand about the canalisation. He doesn't understand about the constraints they have.
But I also think, we are still fighting in the fashion of World War One. Well, do you really know how they fought in World War One? They're not. Montgomery, in this same period, is criticised for is like, he's a World War One general. He'll do a big barrage. He's just learned how to do that. Well, that did win the Great War doing that. But also, it's still not flesh. It's the lesson is that you apply the constraints of wealth versus the freedom of poverty. But so the storm has smashed Mulberry A, the American Mulberry, basically rendered it kind of inoperable.
This is the one at Port-au-Bessin, which is liberated on the 7th of June by 47th Royal Marine Commando. 800
vessels are lost, mostly landing craft. Which also shows Allied wealth that they can absorb a loss like that eventually. Troop landings are reduced by 75%, and critically, materiel is reduced by 50%. So they start to worry about ammunition, don't they, and how much ammo they got, and rationing ammunition and artillery ammunition mainly is the thing that...
Well, and the big problem is that by the 22nd of June, this means the British Second Army is 3 divisions short of its pre-invasion target by that point. And that means it's effectively 5 to 6 days behind schedule. And it also means that the planned first major operation is going to be a corps down. So one entire corps of 2 to 3 divisions less than had been originally planned for.
Yeah, but the Allies are really slow here, Jim. They're just so slow. They can't cope with an enormous storm that destroys one of their prefabricated, unimaginable hub. I think the weather gets a vote. This is the thing people forget about modern warfare. It's interesting. In the last episode, Churchill saying clouds don't stop the V1s. He's right. The Germans actually have come up with a weatherproof air weapon there. Everything's expeditionary. This is the other thing I think it's just so easy quite clear that Hanson Baldwin is forgotten. This whole thing is being done across an ocean, relies on the weather.
He's an absolute tosser. He just doesn't know what he's talking about at all. I'm so on Chet Hanson's side on this one.
Really. by extension Bradley's. The Bradley would the general dislikes slugging it out this way, but the sort of debasement of having to go, look, I'd really rather we weren't having to. It's such shit.
It really is.
But so they're a corps short.
So it means that Epsom has to be downgraded, and what that basically means is that
for those who are joining,
Operation
what's
Epsom,
a corps?
A corps is so how it works is at the top you've got an army group, which is multiple armies grouped together with a kind of overall command. Then you have an army, and an army is made up of 2 or more corps, and a corps is 2 or more divisions.
Yep.
A division. If you keep in mind sort of 15,000 men, you can have like the 12th SS is 20,500.
It can be less. 3 brigades and an artillery regiment.
The British and Canadians have brigades. The Germans and Americans have regiments. Each regiment, and this is where it's all the same, has 3 battalions, infantry battalions, of 800 between 850 and 890 men.
4 companies generally.
Generally 4 companies of between, American companies are 197, British companies tend to be more like about sort of 140.
So scale that back up. If you're a corps short, you're short of all those.
You're short of 3 divisions of 45,000 men, which equates to 1860, about 24,000 men, fighting men.
And you're short of a lot of guns too, because
short a lot of guns that come with it.
Yeah.
Because each, you have armoured divisions which have an emphasis on armour, and you have infantry divisions which have an emphasis on infantry. Each division would have attached troops, service troops, medical troops, engineers, artillery, and then you would have army Agras, Army
Group Royal Artillery,
which
is a separate establishment of guns
which you can move around depending on where they're freelance. Yeah, so that's how it works.
If you're a corps short, that's a big deal.
That's a big difference. Yeah. So what that means is for Operation Epsom, which is the first major coordinated offensive, it means it's going to be a little bit under strength. The main effort is going to be coming from 8 Corps, which is an infantry corps, with the 15th Scottish Infantry Division, which is new to combat, is going to be taking the lead. And the idea is to head south to the west of the city of Caen, and cross over the River Odon. So the land is sort of big, wide open farmland here. This is the same area that 12th SS were attacking on D+1 against those Canadians of the Nova Scotias and the Sherbet Fusiliers. Same kind of area. And then it drops down to the Odon Valley, which runs in a kind of very roughly kind of east to west kind of trajectory, and then climbs up the other side. And the other side, it reaches a high point of which is known as Hill 112. And it's a significant thing because actually the climb out of the Odon Valley is quite steep. So that's the objective, and to cut in behind Caen, which was, of course, the original plan for Operation Perch, which was, obviously came to halt with Michael Wittmann's antics on the 13th of June.
But wasn't anything like the scale of
this
effort.
is a proper kind of coordinated thing. And the problem is time is marching on. There's lots of pressure from London and from Washington, particularly from London because of the V1 rockets coming over. Everyone wants to get a move on. But also Montgomery and Dempsey have intelligence that a number of panzer divisions are arriving. So while they're absolutely keen on getting a breakthrough, neither thinks this is likely. Telling Churchill and everyone else, yes, this is a breakthrough because that's what they want to hear, and it will shut them up. But what they're actually trying to achieve is to draw in as many of these panzer divisions as possible, as quickly as possible. So they're just flung into the battle piecemeal because these divisions are arriving bit by bit. So they're not arriving fully 20,000 men in tanks.
And what you're trying to do is get the Germans to commit bit by bit, so that you chew them up, so you defeat them in detail.
Yeah, and what this then means is they can't then... The chances of a coordinated, properly planned counterattack en masse are less.
Which is ideal. I mean, it sounds like the right way of dealing with things.
Yep.
To the amateur ear. That what you don't want is to give the Germans the opportunity to get organised.
Yeah. Now, what we're going to do is when we go out to Normandy, we're going to do a deeper dive on Epsom. So we're going to skirt over this to a certain extent.
Hill 112 battles around this part of Normandy in a way they're a bigger sort of more spectacular tank encounters, and there's Goodwood and there's Cobra and all the things to come. But this is the bit where what Montgomery's trying to do is offer the Germans flypaper, right? Yep. Isn't he? And get the Germans to get stuck and chew them up. And this is where
grind them down, trips them.
This is where the bulk of the German armoured effort is going. It's not going.
Nearly
all
west.
of it. Nearly all of it.
So there's the 17th SS Goetz von Berlichingen.
Yeah.
And Das Reich is on its way, but isn't going to get there anytime soon. But otherwise, they're all converging on Caen. If you include Panzerlehr in that. Panzerlehr is a little bit further west, but it's in the British Canadian sphere.
I mean, one could argue that the British have the most experience in fighting German armour, right? So that's partly why. That's what they're going to do.
I think.
Could you argue that? Or is it deliberate?
No, I don't think that's got anything to do with it. Actually, I think it is purely because of Caen on the hinge.
Right.
It's the hinge, but because Normandy and Brittany are out on this limb, from the rest of France and further, a little bit further south. So to get to Germany and to get to Paris, you're going to have to swing northeast. Yeah. So this is the Caen is So the Caen is the pivot. And so it makes sense for the Germans with their mobile reserve to try and knock that pivot back into the sea as quickly as possible, defend it and make sure that they don't do that. So that's why they're converging on this. And also, frankly, it's closer than it is to go to the other side of the western side.
It's easier to get there if you're being attacked from the sky.
So what you're finding is that 8 of those 10 mobile divisions are all hurtling towards the Caen area, although they're not all here by any stretch of the imagination. But the interesting thing is there is a kind of sort of a taster operation which is launched on the 25th of June, Sunday the 25th of June, which is Operation Martlet, and that is where the Sherwood Rangers are involved, and the 8th Armoured Brigade and 49th Bears Division. So this is to try and take the Rauray Ridge, which is just a little bit further westwards, and a little bit further south as well. And it's not a significant ridge at all, but it's one of those kind of +1 -1 pieces where you're denying it to the enemy and getting from the benefit of it as well.
Yeah.
And what they really want to do is get this ridge so that German artillery can't be used to pour onto the Epsom battle the following day. Yeah. So that's the plan of that. And as it turns out, they don't get the ridge until the following night, the 26th. So it's kind of all a bit, but it keeps them all busy. And that's the point. So it sort of works. But it's a very, very misty day on the 26th of June in the morning, and the 15th Scottish Infantry Division are attacking in mizzle and low cloud, 10 temps cloud. It's all a bit murky across these really vast open fields to a largely hidden enemy. But they actually make about 5 miles on the first day, between 5 and 7 miles on the first day, which is pretty good going. They do get across the Odon. And they do get up to Hill 112 on the other side by the 30th of June, which I think is pretty good going. And by that point, they're coming up against elements of 9th SS, 2nd Panzer, 10th SS, 1st SS, plus 12th SS, and of course Panzerlehr involved as well. Yeah. So, that's quite a lot. By the 1st of July, it's kind of the whole thing sort of run out of steam, as it inevitably does after kind of 5 to 6 days. This is not Italy. They're not prepared to kind of completely chew up their divisions in an attack in the way they are in Italy. It comes to a halt, but it also comes to a halt because the Germans have run out of steam. Everyone's run out of steam. Everyone's done in. But at the same time, other exciting things are happening because on the 27th of June, Cherbourg falls. So, Hitler's
but Cherbourg must never fall.
But it has.
Oh, it has.
The same day, Dolman, who's the 7th Army commander, has a heart attack and dies.
It's probably for the best.
Probably.
It's a lot, saved yourself a lot of stress there, hasn't it?
Yeah. 3 days later.
Dying of a heart attack.
Yeah. But I think it's sort of greater benefit to the Germans but 30th of June, the last German troops in the Kota town are cleared. So that's a major thing. Obviously, Cherbourg's in no state to be used as a port at that point, and also there's no real point because you've got you've got the beaches working perfectly, and you've still got a Mulberry at Arromanches. Yeah. The big decision really in the Epsom battle is the decision by Dempsey and Dick O'Connor, who was captured. He was the commander of the Western Desert Force in 1940. In early 1940, were captured at the end of that amazing stint where he captures kind of 133,000 Italian troops in Libya. Then spends the next couple of years in an Italian prison camp, manages to get back, and is given 8 Corps to command for Normandy. And he's brilliant, Dick O'Connor. I mean, he's a very kind of driving, inspiring guy.
Yes,
and,
he's one of the sort of nearly men of the war. If he'd not been captured, maybe he'd be running the whole show by this point.
Absolutely. I'm sure he would have been.
I think he probably would have been,
And he and Dempsey together, neither of whom you could accuse of being kind of shy about going forward, I don't think. I mean, O'Connor particularly is a very aggressive commander, so it's not like he's a kind of slow snail or anything like that. They decide to pull back from Hill 112, which has been very, very kind of hard fought for. And this is obviously a big, significant decision, but they have got these 5 panzer divisions around them, and the danger is that they get pinched off at the foot of the salient, and all the troops on 112 get rounded up and caught in the bag, which would be seen rightly as a major, major defeat and setback, which it would have been. Yeah. So it's better. The better part of valour is to pull back. Now, this is going to have consequences, but the benefits of pulling back absolutely, in my mind, completely outweigh the consequences of not doing so. It's important to understand that in 24 days of fighting, the Germans have so far lost 62,603 men at an average of 2,608 per day. So these are really big numbers. And the other really important thing to understand about Epsom is that while it doesn't achieve the breakthrough, and as I said earlier on, no one was expecting this apart from, Eisenhower and people back home. Yeah. That is the outcome is no longer a doubt. I mean, that is the last chance the Germans have to mount a coordinated counterattack that has even a whiff of success. But this is now on, it's over.
But this is the thing. I think they never were going to get organised like that, were they?
No, but they're definitely not from now on. Yeah, that's the point. Yeah, it is.
They've missed their chance to do things.
Yes, and let's just go back to the 7th of June. With that 12th SS counterattack that fails. And you remember we were saying one of the lessons from this, it shows how hard it is to fight. So the British at Epsom are going in the opposite direction to 12th SS were on the 7th of June. The major fighting bulk of that division was going against 1 infantry battalion and 1 tank regiment and failed to push them back more than a mile. This attack, Epsom, has pushed the Germans back 7 miles in this particular to create this particular dent. That is not insignificant, whilst at the same time attriting 5 panzer divisions in a significant way. And the consequences of the Germans are that this is seen as a major defeat, to the extent that Gehr von Stauffenberg is sacked on the 1st of July, replaced by General Heinrich Hans Eberbach, who has lost part of his nose.
And he's come from the Eastern Front, so he's not going to know what to do.
Yeah, but he's a pretty experienced panzer man. Eberbach is a good. But Eberbach is really
got the solutions, though, has he?
Well, no one has because they don't exist. But he's super competent. I mean, he doesn't really put a foot wrong. I would say, considering the hand he's been given. Von Rundstedt is sacked yet again.
Von Rundstedt, how much redundancy does he pick up during the Second World War? I mean, is he one of those redundancy guys who gets jobs and
he's quite right. He's quite right that they sack him. He's completely lost all interest. He's just not interested anymore. He's polishing his monocle. So he's replaced by Field Marshal Gunther von Kluge.
At what point are people ringing OKW and saying, "Make peace, you fools"? When does that sort of thing start happening in the Normandy campaign? Not yet.
No, and it's really, really interesting, all that, because the conversations between Rommel and Eberbach and Bittrich and Hauser and also Dietrich, Sepp Dietrich, and even Panzermeyer, they're all, because Panzermeyer's now by this point commander of the 12th SS because Witt's been wounded. They're all going, this is insane, we've got to knock this on the head. Even the hardened Nazis, because this is self-evidently.
The other difference with the Eastern Front, because we an Eastern Front man, all that sort of thing, they don't know how to deal with the air power. The other thing is the concentrations here of corps, divisions, brigades, armour. They're it's a much more densely concentrated battle than anything the Germans have fought on the Eastern Front, isn't it?
Oh yes.
Because there's a Soviet observer, isn't there? At the same time saying a Soviet commander that fails in this situation, he'd be shot. But at the same time saying, what do you mean? There's like a whole corps crammed into that, like 10-mile stretch. What do they've never seen anything like it. And by that virtue, nor has anybody. This is the most concentrated fighting of the Second World War by a long way. And you talk to modern soldiers about it, and they look at density of the fighting and say, well, we'd be a lot more spread out than this. We wouldn't handle it like this at all. But this is the point. This is
well, there's no greater density of panzer divisions anywhere at any point in the entire Second World War than here.
But exactly. That's exactly it. Which is what you want if you're trying to defeat those panzer divisions. Is you want them all to serve themselves up for breakfast. And that's what they do.
And the bottom line is they're coming up against the British and Canadians, and the British Canadians are winning.
Yeah,
they are. The Germans are not gaining any ground whatsoever. No. They're losing ground. Yeah. They might be incrementally, but they are losing ground, and they're losing a huge amount of manpower and indeed material at the same time.
So at Caen, the Canadians tried to take Carpiquet, which is Operation Windsor on the 4th of July.
Yep. They come up against the 12th SS Hitlerjugend there.
Yeah, and then on the 8th, it's Operation Charmwood, and this is interesting because this is Bomber Command, who have been co-opted by SHAEF to be used tactically rather than bombing cities and all that, much through gnashing and wailing of teeth by Bomber Harris, are bombing now in Normandy.
Yes, I mean the key thing is everyone always thinks it was all Monty's fault. He wanted to completely destroy Caen pointlessly. Okay, so the point about this is to hit the southern part of Caen only, because that's where the bulk of the Germans are. And it's the same thing. It goes back to this fibula thing. There's fighting in built-up areas, which is you don't want loss of buildings because it turns into ghastly street fighting. I think
they call it a modified environment.
A modified environment, right. So yes, it is true that you then get piles of rubble, but at least you can see. That's the point behind it.
Caen does fall on the 10th of July, and it's the 12 SS are at 15 to 20% strength. It's all completely disastrous if you're the Germans.
Horror story. And Panzermeyer, who is in command of this, he basically disobeys Dietrich.
Yeah.
Dietrich says, I need to pull back. This is a kind of, ardent SS, he's an absolute Nazi.
A complete believer.
He's a complete believer, and he's saying, we have to pull back. And Dietrich says, no, we can't, we've got to fight for every yard. And he just does it anyway. So these are the people who are supposed to be the most loyal, the most dedicated, the most kind of sort of go against any orders and all this kind of stuff. And he does. And he says, the soldiers of the 12th SS Panzer Division were at the end of their physical endurance. They had gone to war weeks before with fresh, blooming faces. At this point, camouflage, muddy steel helmets, Stahl, cast shade on emaciated faces whose eyes had, all too often, looked into another world. The men presented a picture of deep human misery. I mean, they're getting
their asses kicked, basically.
Yeah.
And they're bitten off more than they could chew, and they're getting their asses thoroughly kicked. We're going to take a quick break now, and when we return, we will grapple with some of the historiographical
misconceptions.
Jim's going for misconceptions. I was going to say
bullshit.
War waffle that has bloomed up around the Normandy campaign.
Man for man.
We'll see you in a minute.
Things change, but Deer Park Natural Spring Water is a constant you can count on, bringing you the essence of home for 150 years and counting. Sourced from carefully selected springs, Deer Park Natural Spring Water has naturally occurring electrolytes for a crisp, refreshing taste. Find Deer Park Natural Spring Water at your favorite local retailer today. After 150 years, there's only one thing left to say. Deer Park, that's still good water.
Hello listeners, it's Anita Anand here from the Goalhanger sister podcast Empire, which I host along with
me, William Dalrymple, and we are here to tell you about our new series on the founding fathers, the men who made America.
We wanted to look at the men who actually founded the country, who dreamt the dream, who wrote the words upon which a country would be born. What were they like? What made them do what they did? What did they actually believe in? And how did they come to play the role that they did in the American Revolution and the creation of America?
What really interested me about this was the contradictions. I mean, we expect these men to be great figures. We've seen the portraits in the galleries. We know the faces from the banknotes, but they're deeply complex figures. But in that blend of contradiction and intellectual power and writing genius and curiosity and raw ability lies the nuance and complexity that allows us to understand them. And the United States is in many ways a reflection of them, their beliefs, their experiences.
These are the men who wrote the Constitution. These are the men who created the federal system in every way. They are totally fundamental to what American politics looks like today.
It all goes back to this extraordinary group of men.
Yeah, and they have rip-roaring yarns as well, let me tell you. So if you want to know why America is the way it is and who the men were who made it, you can listen by searching Empire wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back to We Have Ways That Make You Talk. This episode, yes, it's called The Constraints of Wealth and the Freedom of Poverty.
Well, yes, and I have to...
Which isn't about some happy hobo.
No, I'm gonna give full credit to Steve Prince, great friend of the podcast. He came up with this phrase. And as soon as he said it, I said, "Oh, Steve, that's so good. That is so good. Can I steal it, please?" And he went, "Be my guest, Jim." And so I've used it many times since. But I want to give credit where credit is.
The core of the reason we're talking about this is there are many schools of thought around the Normandy campaign, and the magnetic north for most of them, right? That they all, one way or another, point towards is the idea that the Allies. It's taking too long. It's slow. And this was an argument at the time. So it's not like you've got to go...
Well, it's people like Hanson Baldwin.
Well, and exactly, Eisenhower and...
Because they're looking at the map and they're going, you've got all this material, nothing's happening.
But the point is, if you're trying to write that argument, you haven't got to go far to find it. You're not rooting around in a untold story of the Second World War.
No, I think all the major, in the kind of 70s, 80s, 90s into the first decade of this century, all the narrative histories of Normandy were peddling the same, that the Germans had the best weapons, that they were tactically more astute and more agile and better trained, that Montgomery was unimaginative, cautious, all these sort of things, very ponderous, and really, with all their preponderance of material and air power and all the rest of it, they should have done much quicker, much better. They're all a bit rubbish.
Hitler's a terrible commander, and he's if only. And this comes from like 1946, where Little Heart's talking to generals in captivity, and they're all going, well,
if only we didn't have the Führer.
If only we didn't have the Führer, we'd have won the war. And you sort of think, well,
no, you wouldn't.
No, you wouldn't. You wouldn't. But do you really want to be saying that?
and this is where I return to my 3 levels of war thesis, because I would argue, and I think I can argue fairly convincingly, that the way the Second World War has been told by, and I'm going to name a few names here, but particularly some people like sort of Carlo D'Este, who was an American historian, former army officer as well.
Decision in Normandy.
Enormous book, and the central thesis is that the plan was wrong. It was all Montgomery's fault. The fact that he said he was going to be in, 50 miles south by D plus 17, and he wasn't, and that just shows how awful he was.
It really concentrates on phase lines, that book. It's all about the phase lines, which we talked about at, I think, the first episode, where, Montgomery and Bradley have an argument at St Paul's School about whether you put the phase lines on the map in the first place, on the planning map. And the phase lines, you need phase lines because you're looking at organising supply, you're looking at, and motivating people. So there's all those different things.
But also the key point about those phase lines is they're based on assumptions, and the only assumptions you can use, or the basis of those assumptions, is previous experience of fighting against the Germans in North Africa, in Sicily, in southern Italy. And those are entirely reasonable assumptions based on that previous experience.
You can't base it on what's going to happen.
And they're irrelevant because the battle is playing out differently to how they supposed back in, the first meeting on the 7th of April 1944, and again when they reviewed the whole plan on the 15th of May. The overall effect is, I would argue, even greater than it might have been, because what you're doing is, rather than the Germans retreating with a fairly large degree of cohesion, they're being attrited bit by bit. Now, doesn't mean that they're
trying to counterattack with no cohesion.
Well, they're trying to counterattack with no cohesion,
which is a completely reverse strategy, isn't it?
Carlo D'Este and co, when they're writing about the Second World War, they're writing about the strategic level and they're writing about the tactical level. So you get a bit of logistics, but what they're really focusing on is what's going on in Montgomery's headquarters, what's going on in Bradley's headquarters, what's going on with Eisenhower and Churchill and the generals back at home, and what Brooke is thinking in his diary. And they're talking about the little man on the ground, the guy in his foxhole.
Well, look at the Duke of Wellington's, for instance, which we'll get to, which is like one of the magnets for people trying to make the case that the British are good, right?
But what they're missing is the operational level, and the operational level, as we've said before, is this bit that binds the strategic to the tactical, and is what it's the nuts and bolts. It's the economies of war. It's how you fight your war. And of course, the Allies are fighting a different war to the Germans because they're doing a multi-format air, land, and sea tri-service piece, which is fundamentally amphibious. Every point, they've got to get across the channel, and that imposes a kind of different approach. And it's also a firepower heavy approach. And there's very, very good reasons for this, which we'll get on to. What one has to understand is that when you're using this firepower heavy approach, you're calling on offshore naval guns, you're calling on huge amounts of artillery, calling on air power, and what you're doing is you're using the infantry and the armour, the tanks, to probe forward, because what you have worked out is that the Germans will always counterattack
without fail.
And it's a Pavlovian response.
And this is doctrine that was evolved in the First World War, where after all, what the Germans are doing, they're fighting a defensive war. I mean, this is the thing essentially. What you do is you counterattack regardless, because what you don't want to do is lose your defensive positions, which is where this conception comes from in the first place. Exactly. And the fact that it's a remnant now when they will always...
People who are fighting the First World War battle.
Well, there we are. I mean, there you go. Well done, Jim. Yeah, I'll buy that. But what the Germans will do without fail is they will counterattack. So what you can do, while they form up for their counterattack, you shell them.
Yeah. But the point is that the moment you counterattack, you then have to get up out of your places of concealment,
exactly, that's the point,
out of your foxholes, and you have to get across that field. Yeah. And that's the moment of weakness. It's actually very difficult to kill people when they're in a foxhole, unless it's they get an unlucky or you get a lucky hit.
The 25 pounder, which is the standard, the sort of general field howitzer that the British have. A 25 pounder round has to land within 3 feet of you to kill you. It's interesting because we've got lots of 25 pounders and the rate of fire is, I think it's 10 rounds a minute. And you can absolutely plaster someone, but you don't really do anyone very much harm. You keep their heads down. And the British know this. They this is the practicality of the weapon. But this is the point. But the minute they're in the open, the effectiveness of a weapon like that changes quite radically. Yeah. And you are hurting people. You are slowing them down. You are killing them. Why wouldn't you? The thing is if you if you can do this, why wouldn't you do it? And this is also a function of air supremacy because the Royal Artillery have spotter planes up who can direct fire. And there's that great story, isn't it, where Dempsey goes up and the shells are whooshing past them. They're almost knocked down by a barrage. as they're flying over the lines, because the point is the Germans just don't have the resources at disposal, which brings us back to the constraints of wealth, the freedom of poverty. If you're making the Carlo D'Este argument, one of the things that's helpful if you're making the argument is Montgomery's insistence on saying it all went exactly according to plan and everything panned out the way I expected it to. And then you can go, well, here's a bit that didn't quite. So, you're not the genius you say you are. But actually, operational piece into the sandwich, it does. It does work out.
Because they are attriting them, they are grinding them down. There is going to be the grinding battle, and then there's going to be the breakthrough, and it's exactly how it happens. It just doesn't happen in the manner that they're expecting beforehand. But the result is the same.
Conceptually, they get what they're after.
Yeah.
And the Allied conception.
But also, as the kind of ground forces commander, you're also not going to go, this is all going pear-shaped and this isn't going how I imagined at all, because you've got to there's issues of morale. But you're absolutely right. But the point about all this is that what you do is you send forward the infantry and the tanks to poke the hornet's nest, to get the Germans to come up out of their concealed positions and counterattack. So they're the kind of patsies effectively, and the moment they do that, the Germans do then emerge for the counterattack. That's when you wham them with air power, with artillery, with
and they run into your anti-tank screen.
But of course, but
for instance,
you can't just click your fingers and organise it, because you've got so many moving parts and different services and different organisations, all of which need to be coordinated in a pre-digital age. And it's not very, it takes time. This is the constraints of material wealth. Yeah. This is why every major operation is a major operation, not a minor operation, because it's so complex. And there's so many moving parts, and it is very, very complex.
And think of how many, in 1940, the BEF, there's one radio per battalion for talking to brigade. That's now been completely devolved down to it down into platoons, hasn't it? Yeah. So just think of how many radios you need to have working in order to be able to do any of this.
Yes.
And they need to work because your doctrine is based around the idea that you use them. If you think of it like that, technologically like that, you're looking at a really complex picture immediately, because you need trained signalmen, you need fresh batteries, you need a REMI signal tech Mac guy per battalion who can fix these things when they go wrong. So immediately we're into complications, and you're not going to. And also because the way you've chosen to fight is not to be cautious, but steel not flesh, to entice the Germans into counterattacking, onto your anti-tank screen, onto and all those things. Yeah. Those things all need to work. They all need to. So you're getting those ducks in a row. What you're not doing is you're not doing it on the fly, because that's not the way you. That's not the way you do it.
And it's careless.
And it doesn't play to your strengths.
No, and this is the key point. Is that this is about preserving men's lives as much as you possibly can. So it's inherently sensible. Not the enemies. Not the enemies. They want to kill as many people as possible, but this is your own side. And it's inherently sensible, because what you're doing is you're using global access, your industrial might, your technological advancement to do a lot of the hard yards for you. And this is, although in the narrative we tend to focus on people in tanks and particularly the infantry, actually, when you look at it, this is the most cost-effective, practical way of doing it, which uses the least amount of manpower in the most dangerous spots. And to put this into some emphasis, Second Army, British Second Army, the proportions are 14% infantry, 8% tanks, of which only 48% are in tanks. I think it's 22% artillery, 18% engineers, so more engineers than there are infantry.
Yeah.
And 43% service corps.
But those engineers are working on the Mulberry stevedores. They're building roads. They're fixing the railway network, which has been smashed to pieces. They're building
bridges. They're doing whatever,
as well as combat engineering. So, which is obviously also going on, because there's minefields to clear and there's booby traps to defuse and all the EOD.
Actually, that 14%. There's 86% of British Second Army is not infantry, but 95% of the story is infantry.
Yeah, but we're talking about the constraints of. Yeah. Before we get to the freedom of poverty, the other thing is if you're. People describe Montgomery as cautious. If you're an infantryman fighting in Normandy in the British Army, you don't think the caution is what's going on, do you?
No, you think it's absolutely.
you think it's horrendous.
And it is.
And it is, because this is the thing, actually, this campaign, for all the attempts to steel not flesh it, chews through infantry and armoured soldiers like mad, doesn't it? To the point where you have blokes who've been trained as artillery being re-rolled as infantry, people from because the Navy's overmanned. Basically people start to dribble in from all three services and ending up being infantrymen. There is a shortage because no matter how you try to do this, it's still burning through infantry. And there's no sense that you're fighting a cautious war if you're in the DCLI or or the
49th Bears Division,
or whoever,
the Duke of Wellington's, exactly.
Duke of Wellington's. But the freedom of poverty, which is the reverse of this, is basically the Germans don't have these constraints on them.
Well, yeah, and everyone's been terribly impressed by battle groups, Kampfgruppen. Yeah. This idea that unlike the unwieldy British and Americans and Canadians, the Germans can just click their fingers and they can manoeuvre themselves into a kind of multi-format, all-arms unit. Well, yeah, of course they can, because they haven't got air power and naval power and vast amounts of artillery to coordinate, so it's a much simpler thing. So you've got the freedom of poverty, but obviously from a German point of view, you'd much rather have all those assets than not have them, so that they can organise themselves very quickly. But a case in point of this is where we shouldn't be so impressed by this is the evening of the 26th of June, Monday the 26th of June on the Rauray Ridge, which is being attacked by Sherwood Rangers and the DLI, infantry of the DLI. Panzermeer organises Max Wünsche, who's one of his regimental commanders in 12th SS, to hastily cobble together all the panzers he can get. So he's got Wittmann's 101 heavy panzer battalion of Tiger tanks. He's got some Panthers who have been fighting on the other part of the Operation Martlet front, the other attacking brigades a bit further to the west, plus a whole load of Panzer IVs that Wünsche has already got. So these, you don't mix up tanks in the same formation. So suddenly you've got some Tigers, you've got some Panthers, you've got some Panzer Mark IVs, you've got some Grenadiers, infantry, all kind of cobbled together at breakneck speed. They're all absolutely knackered, and there is no unit cohesion whatsoever. That is why 13 German tanks get knocked out for no loss at all to the Sherwood Rangers. Yeah. The freedom of poverty, but it's also the weakness of the battle group and the weakness of that poverty.
Exactly, and you're sticking yourself to the flypaper willy-nilly, aren't you?
It's not as impressive as people think it is.
Well, you know what, Jim? When I filmed Road to Berlin 20 years ago, I took Carlo D'Este with me to read.
Were you sucking in?
No, I wasn't, because it just felt. I mean, in a strange way, so much of it felt. And what's interesting about him is he was an experienced soldier in Vietnam and everything. He was a combat soldier. He knew his stuff. So much of it felt like just forgetting how difficult it all is, which I think is really, really interesting. And maybe that's because even if you fought in Vietnam, you hadn't fought the sheer scale of this kind of interstate, peer-to-peer interstate warfare, which is what this is a thing that no one is, well, maybe in Korea, but you know what I mean? I think he was applying a difference of experience, category error to what was going on. The troop concentrations, the complexity of deploying armoured divisions at corps level, all these things. It's just a completely different ballpark. And I remember reading it thinking he doesn't really get stuck into. It felt very impartial because he doesn't get hung up on how the Americans are getting on. I think there's a chapter which ends with the Americans also having problems. He doesn't bother with them. It's all about Montgomery and how much he doesn't like Monty. I don't know. I was not suckered in, and not one bit. And because the other thing is. There's Bocage, which I think is the thing people know about for Normandy, which we'll come to in a moment. But also the open country, the close country's difficult. The open country's difficult,
as the 12th SS discovered on the 7th of June. So what happens on something like Epsom is you have the morning barrage. You don't have any aircraft coming over because there's 10 tenths cloud and they can't see, and that's also problematic for offshore naval guns as well. So you're very, very dependent at the start of Epsom on the 26th of June
on local artillery.
So you would have a barrage. So they would fire concentrations and then they would fire a barrage. So the concentrations is where you've got a sort of 200-yard square area and everything is focused on that to just obliterate everything in that square. Yeah. And then you move on to the next one, then you move on to the next one. So you do the concentrations and then you do the barrage, which is just everyone firing in front of them. And so what you've got is you've got a sort of a curtain behind which the infantry and armour can advance. But obviously there's a point where that has to stop and then you're exposed. And what you're hoping is that by the time it stops, the enemy are discombobulated, stunned, struggling to sort of get to their machine guns. Some of them have been attrited and killed or wounded or whatever. And so their effectiveness is far less than it might be. And to a certain extent, that is always the case. What you've got is you've got infantry moving with tanks. So you might have a tank moving out and tanks might be, they'll be operating in troops of 5 or 4 or 3 or whatever, depending on how they've aligned themselves. But between 3 and 5 in a troop, 19 in a squadron. And this is British, by the way, and Canadian. They would be quite spaced apart, but, perhaps 40 yards apart, something like that. And you'll be trying not to kind of get an overlap. So the enemy can't, so you're an isolated one, so that an enemy shot can't get two in one go. Yeah. You then have infantry kind of between them, and an infantry will be operating with kind of, maybe two companies up front, 1 and 2 in reserve. Yeah. Of those, you'd then have 2 platoons up front, 1 in reserve. A platoon is 36, 37 men. You'd always have 10% left out of battle, so in case it gets annihilated, you've got a cadre from which you can reform something. So, in a company attack, that would be 100 men, 110, something like that. Yeah. You'd be operating in sections, and sections are 10, like the equivalent of a German group or an American squad. And they would be paced, if you're going across an open field, they would be spread out kind of sort of, 10 yards apart, something like that. But, a single mortar shell could easily wipe out 5 of you in just one go.
Yeah.
2 dead, 3 wounded, 1 dead, 4 wounded, whatever
and
like that.
Mortars, I think, mortars and artillery are 80% of casualties in Normandy.
That's your constraints of going across a big open field. Yeah. So you've got this curtain has lifted. Suddenly you're exposed in this big open field. The Germans are getting up to their machine guns and their mortar teams. They're starting to come down. Infantry kind of hits the deck. They've then got to get up again, start crawling forward. You've got to try and work out where targets are. The tanks are trying to kind of take out those machine gun posts and mortar positions and what have you. But one of them goes up in smoke, then another one does. Yeah. The crew are bailing out, trying not to get machine gunned as they do so. Infantry is still trying to move forward. You can see how these attacks grind down very quickly if you're not careful. Obviously, for every single man, that requires nerves of steel to keep going forward when you're very, very vulnerable and very exposed. And that's how these battles work. And once one understands that and understands the landscape in which these things are operating, you can understand why battles are quite slow. And you can also understand that why gaining a bridgehead of 5 miles on day 1 is pretty good going.
Well, what it is, James, is it's amazing.
It's absolutely amazing.
That's the battle in the open fields.
That's the battle in the open fields, but there's also the Bocage.
There's the Bocage, which is, I think, when people think of Normandy, they tend to think of that. To the east, it's more open space, isn't it? And to the west, it's more, essentially. I mean,
it's sort of roughly down the middle.
Yeah, roughly down the middle, isn't it? Yeah. Hard to generalise. Bocage, I mean, the thing is, there's Bocage all over England. It just isn't called that.
No. And it's called Devon.
It's called Devon. It's exactly Devon and Dorset, and it's small fields linked with hedges in between, and the roads that are sort of sunken road with the hedgerows of
holloways.
Yeah, and the hedgerows have grown up over hundreds and hundreds of years, and are dense and thick, and mark out the small fields. Touched on this the other day. These offer defence in depth because you can have a series of lines. The Germans are dug into them. Can withdraw is the point, or relocate to different machine gun fields of fire, traps. Blokes with Panzerfaust, the whole thing naturally canalises the Americans, mainly canalised by this terrain. 4th Infantry Division lose 100% casualties in the fortnight following D-Day, don't they? Fighting in this environment. Earlier on I was saying, the armour's mainly at the British end of things. Well, that's because that's the way the terrain has worked out. Because this would be...
And the geography of nodal points.
Yeah, exactly,
such as
and all that. But it's sort of... It's interesting that's how this thing has come out in the wash. Because armour to start with in the Bocage battle is a kind of limited use, really, isn't it? Because this is an infantry battle. This is a field by field, measured out in hundreds of yards.
Yeah, so it's
scores of yards. I mean, it's really, really hardcore fighting.
Well, when we go to Normandy in June, we're going to be going and having a look at where the Americans were fighting. The 29th Infantry Division is fighting on the ridge line to the northeast of Saint-Lô, that key town which was supposed to be taken in a matter of days after D-Day, but didn't finally fall until, what was it, the 19th of July, I think. Yeah. But that is pure Bocage, as it is throughout the whole of the Cotentin Peninsula, to be fair. And I think in your mind's eye, and I think where Bocage is really distinct, and what people mean about it is there is a wall. There is an earthen stone wall around these fields which has been built first, so centuries apart, and out of this the hedges
grown over.
So the problem is if you're trying to get through it, you've got to climb over the wall, which might only be a couple of feet high, to get through the vegetation. And that's the problem with the Shermans, because if you've got a Sherman tank, it rises up and exposes its underbody, and it just can't get over because it's lost all momentum and it can't push through the thick trees and hedgerows that are all sprouting out of the top of this wall.
Well, if your conception of armour is that it's for manoeuvre warfare and cavalry, it's essentially cavalry, then you're having to reinvent how you use your tanks immediately.
Yeah, exactly. But most of these fields are rectangular. Not all of them. Some of them are little sort of got little corners and all sorts of stuff. But if in one's mind's eye you're thinking in terms of a rectangular field which is lined by hedgerows, let's say you're looking at this rectangular field from an aerial perspective. And the Americans attacking from the south, and in the Cotentin Peninsula, and the Germans are protecting the north. So what you would have typically is you'd have a machine gun post. The Germans would have a machine gun post on the northern line, the upper side of Hedgelow, in the corners, doing enfilading fire across that field. You might have riflemen along the wall. Behind them in the next field, behind the next hedge, you'd have your mortars. This would be zeroed. The field would be zeroed. So the moment Americans try and attack across the field, they know where they are. So the American infantry trying to kind of infiltrate around the sides of this field, but is being seen by the machine guns. And the machine gun from the far corner or the other corner is just cutting them to pieces. And what's happening is they're just getting absolutely decimated trying to get through these fields. What they really need is tanks to go in and go boom, 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 boom on each of the corners, take out the machine gun position and rake the whole thing with machine gun
brass
fire.
Them up with the coaxial and the
exactly.
other machine gun.
So this is, if there's ever a kind of an environment where you need a tank and infantry to work together, it is this. The problem is that Shermans can't get through these fields.
So you need like an infantry tank in the British conception rather than basically a cruiser. So you need, maybe
Churchill.
Maybe Churchill. Maybe Churchill isn't so crap.
But what you really need is a means for a Sherman tank, to get through this bocage, through the hedgerow, the raised wall, and then the hedgerow itself. Of course, because they're Americans, they come up with a solution. What happens towards the end of June? Major General Leonard Giraud is visiting a quiet section of the line at Saint-Germain-d'Elle, which is up on this ridgeline, on a northwest. This is where the 29th Infantry Division are, guys who landed on the eastern side of Omaha Beach. And he's talking to tankers of F Troop, the 102nd Cavalry Squadron, and specifically to Captain James Depew. Have you kind of thought of a solution yet to get through these hedgerows? And Depew goes, well, not really, no. And that night, and Giraud says, well,
sort it out.
Get your skates on, soldier.
Yeah, exactly.
And anyway, so that evening, Depew calls a meeting of his officers and senior NCOs. And Staff Sergeant Curtis Cullen, who has been a mechanic before the war, says, look, the problem is the Sherman is hitting the bocage like two cars coming together bumper to bumper. They're just going boom, and the Sherman can't get through. And he's saying what is needed is something a bit more like a snowplow that just can scythe through the wall and the roots of these hedges, and that can use the momentum of the tank to do the heavy lifting, rather than kind of sort of bang it head on. And Depew goes, yeah, I think you might be onto something there, and puts it to his squadron maintenance officer, who's a chap called Lieutenant Steve Lytton. And Lytton suggests that what they need is something like a fork, like prongs at the front that can cut through the hedge, fork it out, both the wall and the roots, with using the momentum of the forward advance of the Sherman tank. And he says, look, we've got all these beach obstacles, these hedgehogs all over the place, these sort of cross bits of metal. Yep. Why don't we chop them up? Because, of course, being Americans, they've got
workshops.
And they've got, what do you call them?
Welders.
So 2 days later, they've built one out of a former hedgehog with these forks. And the great thing is at the front of the curved front of the Sherman tank, there's two great bits, and this is for hoisting, one of the things that helps at hoisting. There are two eyelets where you can bolt something on, and they trial it. When they first do it, he goes a bit gingerly and just sort of runs into it very gently, and it doesn't really work. And then they go, look, just charge at it, and it just goes through like butter. And I've actually been involved in one of these where we've made one and charged at a hedge.
And what happened?
It went through like butter.
Really?
Yeah, it really, really works. Really, really works.
Giraud gets to see this. Bradley then orders that every tank be equipped.
Yeah, Bradley sees this in action on the 14th of July and goes, right, this is amazing, let's do it. And because they're Americans, let me phone a few chums back in England. Yeah. Workshops are kind of scrounged for these things. And by the end of July, 60% of all Sherman tanks in First Army are equipped with these.
And that solves the that solves the problem.
Well, the interesting thing, we'll get on to how effective they are. And the counter argument is, but by the time they'd done that, they actually won the coat and tan, and and it wasn't really needed, and it was a bit of a waste of time. I mean, what is absolutely without question is that the 4th Infantry Division, 9th Infantry Division, and then 90th, who had a bit of a shocker to start off with, clearing the Coat and Tan Peninsula. They had a terrible time of it, and they did it the hard way, but they did do it. This really comes to the fore at Operation Cobra, but we'll get onto that in the next episode.
Yeah. But I mean, the British call it the prong, don't they? And they put them on. They end up on crocodiles, and they end up on Cromwells and all that sort of stuff. So it's an idea that spreads very rapidly.
It does.
If not, why not?
The Americans call it rhinos.
Yeah. Yeah. Why would you not argue about how effective they are or not? Give the guys the option. Create the thing that gives everyone the option.
It definitely works. There's absolutely no question it works. Yeah. But what this means is that plans are in foot to solve the problem of the Bocage, and really in the American sector, the whole of that area, either side of San Lo and the Coat and Tan and pushing south, towards the coast, towards that kind of sort of border with Brittany, is really Bocage-y. It's just so, when you're there, it's so blindingly obvious that you are in Bocage country. Yeah. You can completely see it. And when we do go over to Normandy, we'll be driving around that area. Well, we'll have to kind of sort of report on it. But you're just all those problems that you have of how to kind of move forward and the other things that they're doing is really, really effective is they're putting an airman. And this is Pete Casada, who is the commander of the 9th Tactical Command, Fighter Command, sort of 9th Fighter Command of the 9th Air Force, US 9th Air Force. What he decides is they put VHF radios in the squadrons up in the air, but also in the tanks and the lead of the column. So you have a tank at the lead of the column, and you have an airman, and they are able to communicate directly with the umbrella of fighter planes above. And this has two effects, because what it means is the guys in the plane can go, watch it, there's an 88 around that corner. Or they can say, or the guys in the tank can go, we want to attack this bit, but we're going to put out some blue smoke, and whatever you do, or yellow smoke or whatever, we're here, don't bomb us on a blue on blue. Yeah. And that coordination between air and ground is a major breakthrough. And the Allies have been sort of inching towards that with the Rover David technique, this idea of having umbrellas and forward observers on the ground beetling around in armoured cars. But this is taking it to the kind of sort of next level. And it's really, really efficient. It means you're avoiding blue on blues, but it also means that the guys in the air are an extra set of eyes. They're the equivalent of a drone to the guys in the tanks below. And that is also a game changer and helps speed it up. But these things have got to be learned on the ground. And what is impressive is actually the speed with which they develop these techniques, whether it be kind of, VHSs and VHFs in tanks and aircraft, or whether it be rhinos, or whether it be other techniques. But the point is this may seem attritional and slow and they're not doing very well. Actually, they're learning and absorbing these lessons incredibly quickly.
But having started
brilliantly.
Having started this episode talking about the constraints of wealth and the freedom of poverty, this is the freedom of wealth.
Yes, this is also the freedom of wealth. Yeah,
there's
no constraints about that. It's just about coordination.
If we need to adapt our tanks, we will.
Yeah,
and we'll mass produce the part if we need it in a hurry, and if we want to improve our tactical air capability, we will.
Yes, but and let's just face it. Coolin and Lisson have this idea for the Rhino, the hedge cutter, at the end of June. By the end of July, 60% of all First Army Shermans are equipped with it. In that period, everyone's getting fed up and kind of, what's happening and when are we going to have the breakthrough and all the rest of it. But you're talking about 4 weeks. In what other armed forces anywhere at any point in history could you enact something quite that quickly?
But that's it. That's from the constraints to the freedom of wealth, in fact.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thanks, everyone. We hope you've enjoyed this episode. We got a bit philosophical during that, Jim.
Yeah, that was good, though, isn't it? That's the kind of sort of meaty, fun stuff.
Did some historiography as well, which, I always think is as interesting, can be as interesting as anything else. If you're enjoying listening to this, I expect if you're this far in, you've already joined the Apple subscription channel to avoid the adverts, and so that you can listen to this all in one enormous... I mean, your dog... If you're walking the dog's extremely grateful to us. Or if you're on a rowing machine, you must be very buff by now, listening to this series. So if you'd like, subscribe to our Apple channel or become a patron. We have ways of making you talk. Or even better, come to our festival in July. WeHaveWaysFest.co.uk, where exactly this kind of you can be caught in the very room as we war waffle with us. We're tent. Anyway, we'll see you soon. Thanks for listening. Cheerio.
Cheerio.